Welcome to another tutorial with your boy Trev. Today, or in this part, we'll be discussing functions. Now, I think functions are important because, say you have a block of code, right? And that block of code consists of 10 lines of code. Now, if you want to repeat those 10 lines of code, it would mean that if you want to repeat them 10 times, then it means that you will have to write them 10 times over again, which would mean that you will use up to 70 lines of code. But with functions, you can write that block of code once and then you can repeat it 10 times just using one line of code, right? So that would mean that if your code consists of 10 lines of code, and you want to repeat that line of code 10 times, then it would mean that you would only use about 20 lines of code. So functions are important because they save you time and they save you uh, the unnecessary writing of code that is already there, that already exists. Let us take a quick example. This is a code that I've already written before prior to this to the recording of this chat. These are 9 lines of code, and as you can see, there are 3 calculations there. You have A, which we assign the integer 10, and B, which we assign the integer 20, and then there we add them up, and uh, as you can see, the output there would be 30, and then that as well we add up, and the output is 50. If you notice there are 9 lines of code. However, we can do these 3 calculations within 5 lines of code. Let us go through that. Now, we'll create a function that will basically take two numbers and add them together, right? So when you want to create a function, the first thing that you must do is that you must use the def statement. The def statement basically tells the computer that this person is about to create. So you are creating your own function. This person is about to create their own function. And then after the def statement is followed by a name. There always has to be a name. And basically, the name of the function must be a name that I think it's neater that way. It's neat that way if you create a name that that kind of tells you what this function does. So this function adds numbers, and it will add two numbers. So a function name will always be followed by these parentheses, these brackets, and inside these parentheses we will put parameters. So we want to add two numbers, so there will only be two parameters, right? So the two parameters are the same number of parameters as the numbers that we want to add together. If we were to add three numbers, okay, I'll get to an example with three numbers, all right? Uh, then it is followed by the colon. You press enter, then your statements will then be indented over there. We'll only return one statement. The return statement, basically what it does is that it is used for returning an output. So if you have a block of statements here and you want to use those statements to carry out or to give an output, then you'll use the return statement. In this case, we want to return the sum of a plus b, right? So we are now done. We've already created our function. We are done, right? So what this function does is that it will add a plus b. So this function does not get its functionality from this def statement. It does not get its functionality from the name. It gets its functionality from the statements that are indented within the function. In this case, it gets its functionality from this one statement over here, return a plus b. So that is what our program does. It returns a plus b. Um, Now we want to call that function. When you call a function, basically you just you named the function add, and then um, you pass, you want to give these parameters over here, you want to give them values, right? So we'll add 10 and 5. So basically, let me go through this again. You have created your function over there, right? Now you want to use this function. So the function is not used here. It is only defined here. This is where we use the function, right? So these values that we have put inside of here, they are the same number of values as there are parameters. In fact, these values are called arguments. So we pass arguments to this function. In other words, we now say we assign 10 to A and 5 to B. So what this program then does is that it will return A plus B. In other words, it will return 10 plus 5, right? Let us print that. As you can see there, we have called our function add, we passed the arguments 10 plus 5, and this is what we get, 15, right? So let us again see, let us add another number, 20, sorry, add 20 and 15. As you can see, 20 plus 15 is 35. So we have called this function again. So basically, we wrote that code only once. Now we won't need to rewrite it again. We have already saved space. Remember, the first time we used 9 lines of code to do 3 calculations. Look now, we are using only 5 lines of code. So this is why functions are so important. It is that they help us to save time, and they basically help us to write everything that we need to write using fewer fewer lines of code. So let us just do our last calculation, 35 and 19. So it keeps on adding, it keeps on adding and adding every time we call that function, right? Let us see. Let us just do maybe 2 more examples, one more, we'll see. Um, Let us say we want to calculate the average of 3 numbers, right? Def average. Um, Now we'll pass, we said 3 numbers, right? So let's say A, B, and C, right? Now, what we want to do is return, uh, basically when you're going to calculate, an average, you're going to add those numbers together, and then you will just divide by 3 because there are only 3 numbers. Again, now when you call this function, let us print, when you call the function average, you have to pass on the same number of arguments as there are parameters, right? So what our program then will do is that it will take 10 plus 15 plus 25 and divide them by 3. The reason why I put that in brackets is that I don't want, well, we know the mathematical rules, BODMAS. So we first want to add those numbers together and then we divide. We don't want that thing being done backwards, right? So let us just look at that again, and it gives us our average, which is 16.6666668. Right. We can also, as let me create, we've been dealing with integers, but we can also pass on strings to to the function. So let us create a function called city, and we'll pass on the name of the city. All right. Uh, print, because we are dealing with strings here, so we want to print something. I live in, okay, let us do this. I live in the city name. Now we are done creating um, that function. So basically, every time we call this function here, what we want is for it to print where we stay. Oh, I'm sorry, it's deep in the night and I am a bit sleepy. All right, I'm sorry about that. Let us call that function. This time we won't print it like we did with the integers, because there is already a print function that exists within that yeah, there is a print statement here that exists within this function. So all we're going to do is, we are dealing with strings, and I'll say Pretoria, right? As you can see there, I live in Pretoria. So we can also pass strings to the function, um, and yeah, and it will work just as fine. So you can, there are limitless things that you can achieve by using functions. I think that's where we'll stop for this tutorial. See you in the next one. Bye.